Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Crime Time panel, where we'll talk about murder, mafiosos, money, and more. My name is Jane Jorgensen. I'm a branch supervisor in Madison Public Library in Madison, Wisconsin, and I'll be moderating this panel. I'm pleased to welcome Megan Abbott, whose El Dorado Drive is coming out in July from G.P. Putnam's Son Penguin Random House. Lou Berney has Crooks coming out in September from William Morrow, HarperCollins. Eli Cranor, who has Mississippi Blue 42 coming out in August from Soho Crime, Soho Press. Mel Pennant, who has A Murder for Miss Hortense coming out in June from Pantheon, Penguin Random House. And Julia Seals has A Terribly Nasty Business coming out in June from Random House, Penguin Random House. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to jump right in with our first question for Lou. You've got an incredible cast of characters, each unique and who could have a book of their own. Did one of them come to you first, or were they all part of the plan from the start?
They were definitely not part of the plan from the start. I think I knew I wanted siblings. I wanted a group of siblings to follow over the course of, 40 or 50 years. And I think I started out with 3 siblings and I ended up with 5. And it was one of those kind of occasions where the other 2 just kind of muscled their way into the story partway through and became they were minor characters who became way too interesting to leave out of the family. So they were kind of adopted into the family, which to me, those are the most fun kind of characters when the ones you don't expect are going to be big ones kind of do that. And that's kind of how it happened with Crooks.
Thank you. Mel, you draw a vivid portrait of a community, its inhabitants, Miss Hortense, and some terrible crimes. Where did your writing story begin with the story?
Thank you. So my journey started definitely with the community. It's a group of immigrants who settled into a fictional English suburb of Biggleswade in the Midlands in England in the 1950s and 60s. I'm always really interested about what rests just under the surface, and the things that are hidden that you don't see. And in this more marginalized community, I was interested in those secrets and what they might be. And, I was interested in the crimes that this community might not be able to go to established law enforcement authorities to solve. So that really started the interest in this story for me. And then it all became about Miss Hortense, this feisty, fearless sleuth who will do anything to uncover the truth. Just sort of followed her through, her exploits of trying to find what's hidden underneath the surface.
Great, thanks. Julia, your novel is an historical mystery with more than a touch of whimsy, and there's much more, including glowing frogs, flying squirrels, and a budding romance. When asked, how are you describing the Beatrice Steele series? And tell us about those flying squirrels.
I would definitely describe the Beatrice Steele series as sort of Jane Austen meets Agatha Christie, more in the vein of the movie Clue. It's very comedic. It's definitely anachronistic. I would probably call it historically inspired because there are a lot of inaccuracies, as my copy editors love to discover for me, but I do think it's kind of part of the fun. In terms of the animals, I just really love frogs, and I think that kind of inspired putting those in book 1. But I also really love both the language of flowers and kind of the symbolism of animals. So book 1, it's really about a young woman and kind of a coming of age for her. So frogs are sort of a symbol of transformation, change. So it's kind of indicating that. And then in book 2, we've got some flying squirrels, which for those, I really wanted to do something that could be possible, hence the flying squirrels. But for the symbolism there, it's really about hard work. So book 2, she's been through the change. Now it's time to do the hard work. So there's a little bit of a symbolism there.
I have to say that frog is my spirit animal. I don't know if you can see my tattoo there, but I love that. Megan, the plot of yours reminded me of the documentary story Murder on Middle Beach, which explored a group of suburban women in Connecticut who were part of a gifting table group, which imploded when a murder occurred. Did you take inspiration from that documentary? And if so, what pieces intrigued you the most? And if not, where did you get your inspiration?
Yes, that definitely sparked the idea. I was fascinated by that story of these sort of suburban ladies who lunch, who, it's sort of the last recession of 2010, sort of became involved in this pyramid scheme, and it all came to the surface because one of the women was murdered, and that the element of these sort of women that you don't normally expect to be involved in it was essentially organized crime. Really fascinated me. And so I just sort of, changed most of the details and also moved it to my hometown, which is Grosse Pointe, suburban Detroit, which sort of the loss of the auto industry, every area was kind of gutted and everyone was trying to make money. And women who'd never really had to worry about anything financially suddenly had to. And then the women in the book, they feel sort of empowered by it, but it's also, of course, a very dangerous proposition. So that element, sort of thrilled me. I called it Goodfellas in a Country Club.
That is reminding me of a later question, so I'll hold that thought for a moment. Eli, you've set your book in the world of college football in 2014 before the NIL, which was the name, image, likeness rules that took place or went into place a little later. What drew you into this time and setting, and do you have a background in the sport?
Yeah, sure. I played college football. I played quarterback, and my last season was like 2010. And I really think the reason I chose this time was it was a little kind of close to where I was playing, because it's just a whole different world now. And also, I started this book years ago. Like it was a thing I kept coming back to between everything I would write. And as I would do that, college football was just constantly like just fast forwarding into this weird, like new thing. So this felt like a time period where the Ed O'Banion NCAA case was happening. Johnny Manziel was making money from getting autographs and taking crap for that. There were all these different things right in this window of time that I felt like if we could trace it back and say like, why did the NIL come about? What sort of investigation, if we were looking into it, might lead to that? That's why I tried to pick this exact time period. It's kind of a place you could timestamp and go back to.
Thanks. Lou, one of the subtitles I saw for Crooks was a family portrait. This seems appropriate as you delve into themes of identity and whether we can ever escape our own upbringing. Can you talk a bit about how you developed the trajectories for each of your characters?
Yeah, one of the things with family, I love that Flannery O'Connor quote about how anyone who's survived childhood has enough information for the rest of their life to, write about. And I feel like that's even more specific to family, like the family you survive has shaped you in such profound ways. And I know I have 2 older sisters, and then I'm so much shaped by who they are, whether I like it or not. And so with this, I wanted each individual sibling to have a different arc, to have a different experience growing up in a family that was kind of crooked and amoral. And so that took a lot of time, just sort of playing around with how do I not be redundant or repetitive and just have the story come from the characters themselves. And so each one has to sort of be the author of their own destiny, or try to be, at least in the context of a family where they're very much shaped by all those people around them for their entire life.
Hey, Megan, your novel is a thriller with an intensifying pace while also being an interpersonal drama that explores the sibling dynamic and how it impacts family identities. Can you tell us about how you were able to integrate those pieces so well?
Thank you for saying so well. That was definitely always the challenge, is you want to keep the energy and the propulsion going, but you have to care about the characters. And this book has 3 sisters at the center. And just as Lou was saying, families are complicated, and there's so years of history, and one look between 2 sisters, and all hell will break loose. So trying to balance those while keeping a forward momentum really is the trick. And most of that for me comes in the revision, trying to sort of make sure that we never feel like we're sitting still, but that we really understand each character so it feels really real, and the danger stranger matters and we care what happens to them. We may not always like them, but we understand them. So that was sort of threading that needle is usually something that happens after the first draft. I'm trying to make it right, and I end up cutting usually about an enormous amount of book. Usually, there's a lot more backstory. I had whole flashbacks. Yes, to keep that pace that thriller readers value, and it mattered to me too.
Mel, the Jamaican inhabitants of Biggleswade in Birmingham have generational connections that allow them to be a village when someone is in need, but can also create long-standing tensions that can erupt in violent ways. Tell us about how you use both of these elements to build your story.
Yeah, so I think you know, for me, the sense of a village is really important, and the partner is really important for creating that kind of sense of community. But at the same time, you know, as you say, there are you know, terrible things, as you know, that happen and that have happened in the past, that have the potential to kind of rip you know, this community apart too. So it was quite important for me to just explore both of those elements. And you know, I hope I've been able to do that. And obviously Miss Hortense, she's someone who, you know, historically she has created this partner, so she's created this village, but she's also got this huge trauma that exists as well. And you know, so we explore both of those elements through her.
Julia, as mentioned, your writing and story has a fair bit of humor, but you also explore some heavier themes of power dynamics, control, and freedom, especially for women. How do you balance those elements in your books?
Well, one quote I really love from Pride and Prejudice is when Mr. Bennet says, "For what do we live but to make sport of our neighbors and laugh at them in our turn?" So I really love just putting the humor in there because I feel like it does feel like how I want to live life, but also feels more realistic to me. And I think there is kind of an element of sort of the fool is kind of the character who speaks the truth in a way. And I think there's a lot of truth in comedy where it might be a joke, but then there is kind of a heavier thing below that joke. So I feel like the balance is actually for me key to kind of exploring those darker themes, is having that comedy allows me to explore them. I'm also just not a very serious person, so I don't think I could not joke around.
Eli, Ray centers the novel as the investigator who is both an outsider as an new FBI agent assigned to the case, and an insider, someone who grew up in the world of college football. Can you tell us about what you intended for her journey?
Sure. Yeah, Ray was kind of where, in some ways, the book started, and Ray is also another thing she's a former pole vaulter, a collegiate pole vaulter. And my wife was also a pole vaulter for the University of Arkansas. And I don't know, I mean, I do this all the time to my wife, but with this book especially, I mean, my wife's not a federal agent by any means. But I really just kind of like plugged her into this world. And I got to see that because I coached football for a while. And so my wife was kind of in that world in that same way that Ray is, you know, like as a woman in the world of football. And so I kind of had all these nice memories and these incidents that I could kind of plug her into, you know, because she's having to go into the locker room, she's having to go into the coach's office, she's having to go onto the sideline, and in this case investigate. So that was where most of that came from.
All right, I'm just going to pause a moment and let the audience listening, if you have any questions and you want to put them in the Q&A, if we have time at the end, we'll ask a couple of them for the authors. So feel free to add questions to Q&A. Mel, I'm a little familiar with something similar to the partner network in Black communities in the United States, but my limited understanding, very limited, was that they were banking efforts only. With the partner network here, Miss Hortense and the others help in a myriad of ways, which leads to her as an investigator. Tell us about any research you did into these cooperative endeavors and how they work.
Yeah, of course. So you're right that there are many forms of partner that have existed in Black communities, but also in other communities, and they're called a myriad of different names. It's kind of a simple sort of system. It's basically an accumulation of wealth. A group of people get together, put their money together, and then it's distributed. And in the UK, the partner was used quite a lot by the Windrush generation, who were the group of men and women that came from the Caribbean in the 1940s and 1970s and settled in the UK. They often formed these partner networks because they were distrustful of banks, or banks had excluded them. And I was just really fascinated by this idea that that generation had created this practical solution to that problem. And then I just sort of thought, where else in this fictional community may this community have been excluded? And it wasn't hard for me to then sort of maybe jump to sort of justice and solving crimes and having those crimes be solved in their community. So I don't know any partner that actually functions like that. It was very fictional, so I'm not surprised you didn't hear about it. But yeah, I just thought, this would be a great thing to explore with this community. And then in terms of research, my grandmother was actually a partner lady, so I was able to draw on my kind of knowledge of her and other people's memories of her. And the partner is very common in the Afro-Caribbean community. So, if you speak to someone from that community, often they'll be able to tell you about it themselves. But I think what's important here is that it hasn't been really highlighted. And I hope that my book is able to do that.
Great. Julia, the idea of art as something powerful that can influence people and society in bad ways, according to the NAGs, your men's group in the book, and good, underpins the mystery. Was that a starting point for you in plotting the book, and how did you develop this thread?
It was a bit of a starting point. I read some research books when I was kind of coming up with what the mystery would be for book 2, and one of the books I read was about the Blue Stockings. So I was very interested in kind of that group in the Regency era and how the women were promoting art and kind of having these interesting salons and talking about culture. But I also did some research on secret societies and kind of how the men were using those to control culture in their own way. So sort of the battle between those two groups kind of started to form the backbone of that mystery. But in terms of the influence for both good and bad, I was just really interested in the idea that, I think people start really trying to control when things are working and progress is happening. So often that can be the time when it feels like things are bad, but it's actually a response to things maybe being good. So that kind of devil and angel dynamic was a big starting point for plotting out this mystery.
Lou, the Mercurial family are all complicated shades of gray characters, and each of their sections could be a novella in and of itself. Is there one you consider to be the protagonist of the book? And perhaps I'm asking if you have a favorite and why.
No, I would never tell you who my favorite was. Like I'm offended that you would even suggest that. They're like children, Jane. No, it was funny. Like I don't know if other writers are this way, but my favorite character is whichever one I'm writing at the time, whoever's point of view I'm in. Like I'm always like they're my favorite, and so this was always in my mind, sort of a mosaic of characters in each one. I love the subgenres of crime fiction, and I thought this would be a book would be fun with each sibling could kind of be their own little subgenre. Like one's corner of one's the muscle, one's the brains, one's the So that was always kind of my thinking to have fun with those ideas through character. But by the end, I loved them all.
Me too.
Thank you.
Eli, college football can already be high stress enough. You've ramped it up with bribery, blackmail, corrupt officials, and violence. Which came first for you as you began the book, the football story or the crime?
I'll start by saying I don't know if I ramped up any of that, or if if you're paying close enough attention, it's a lot of that's there. But no, I definitely fictionalized. I'll tell you where the seed for this whole idea came. I don't remember what game I was watching, but it was down to the wire. You know, it was like a last second play. And I remember thinking, and there was a quarterback, and you know, it was that whole Hollywood thing. Like if they score a touchdown, they win the game. And not to give anything away, but I just had this weird image in my mind where I was like, what if he just took a step back and just chunked the ball out of bounds? Like instead of winning the game, like what if he just threw the ball away and basically gave like a big F you? And then so then the question started spiraling of like, well, why would he do that? You know, like what would be happening behind the surface to make him do that? And that was the whole thought that started me down the path of this book.
It is a good. Now I'm going to be watching all the games pretty closely. Megan, pyramid and multi-level marketing schemes have been around for a long time, but recent real-life examples involve the empowerment, which I think you mentioned a little earlier, of women, and conversely are actually victimizing them. Can you tell us about how you view that dynamic and the role it plays in your novel?
Yeah, it's really complicated because historically, particularly MLMs, multi-layered, right? They really began with like Tupperware and Mary Kay, and they were really a way for women to make money, to have income, and to have some kind of agency. So that it's always been there's something both liberating and pernicious about it because of their very nature. They depend on the fact that only the people at the very top are going to end up making money. So I think the turn, especially in recent years, that troubled me the most and that in part inspired the book is the language of feminism that some of these schemes use. And now they're on social media. They really ramped up during the pandemic, and women in economic distress and on their phone would see, do you want to, this, I made $5,000 in 2 weeks, through this thing. So that really kind of haunted me. So I really wanted to, each woman in the book, the three sisters and beyond, have a different economic problem. They have a financial problem, and they also have a particular talent for this kind of work, and this sort of their work is not valued in the society at large. They're women in their 40s and 50s who don't have, long resumes and maybe not got advanced degree because they were moms and wives. And so this double bind that they're caught in, I think really drove the story for me, and was one of my fascinations with it. And I know I have never launched my own pyramid scheme, but now I know all the tricks. Let me tell you, I learned a lot.
Julia, nags, again, your men's group, their declarations and rules may initially seem exaggerated or impossible to envision, but in reality, there's some uncomfortable parallels with recurring generational cycles. I think you kind of referenced this in your last answer. So can you tell us something about how you see this aspect of the story and how it impacts your characters?
Yes, well, I've always said I see a lot of parallels between the Regency era and today. I think it's one of the reasons why Jane Austen is such a lingering love for so many people, and her birthday is at the end of this year, very exciting. But her 250th birthday. But I mean, it's just amazing to think after all of these years, her themes just resonate so much with readers still. And I do think a big part of that is kind of the themes that she's exploring. As you said, they have recurred. So, this book gets a lot about censorship and kind of people trying to explore culture with those parameters. So I think, as always in the first book, I also found a lot of parallels with the Regency era, even ones that when I first started writing, I didn't even really realize. And the same thing happened with this book, where I wrote it over a year and a half ago at this point, and the themes are only becoming more prevalent. So I do think there's an interesting parallel between our era, and I think it's a big reason why people do still relate so much to those books.
Eli, you have a large cast of characters and a complex plot. If a reader asked you, would you say this was a plot or character-driven novel, and why?
Oh, I would say character, and it's just because the reason there's such a large cast of characters is because the world of college football is it's absurd. You know, it's really there's a pageantry involved. And so in order to get that, like I couldn't just have it through a federal agent's eyes, and I couldn't have it through the crazy multimillionaire coach's eyes, or the politician who's funding the whole thing, or the quarterback, or the guy who's meeting the quarterback at Waffle House to pay him money under the table. It needed this real, I mean, I think there's actually like 13 point of view characters in the book. And that was just to kind of make sure that that chorus of voices that makes up college football could all get heard. So
Okay, Lou, Piggy, or Paul, as he insists, is most often forgotten by the rest of his family, and yet he's the one who's always striving to get them back together in the same place. Can you tell us about how you see his role in the family and how he brings them all full circle?
Yeah, Piggy, for the last little piggy in the rhyme, he is the youngest in the family, and he's kind of the white sheep of the family. Like everyone else has some sort of relationship with crime, and he's got a boring life as a college professor and a wannabe novelist. And at first, I was trying to give him a big story, and then I realized like he's something different in the context of this novel. Like he's the one who's taking it all in and observing and making sense of what's happening with his siblings. And that kind of became the arc overall for him. That changed a lot over the course of the writing of the book. Like I definitely identified with Piggy a lot just because I've had a relatively boring life, luckily. But also, you know, wanting to look at your siblings and say, oh, I want to be part of that group was something that was pretty powerful for him as well. And so, and at the same time, knowing that I don't want to be part of that group whatsoever because it's too dangerous. So that was kind of Piggy all along for me. Paul, sorry. He goes by Paul. He would like you to know that he goes by Paul.
Yes, Paul. Sorry, Piggy. Megan. At one point in the book, when one of the women has purchased a lynx, I think it's a lynx coat, and the others are berating her for the ostentation because it endangers the group's secret, I was reminded of a similar scene in Goodfellas, which you referenced earlier. That's why I laughed. Later, one of the characters makes a passing reference to Don Corleone. Can you tell us about where in the pantheon of crimes you'd place the women and the wheel, and were you intentionally making that kind of connection between this group of women and that more masculine sphere kind of syndicate?
Yes, I'm so glad that you noticed that that Goodfellas reference in particular, because it was sort of my wink to the reader who knows. This is a very famous scene if you know the movie, and kind of iconic. So I all due respect to Martin Scorsese. I really am always fascinated by going into areas of traditionally male power and putting women in to see how they respond differently and the same. So that, you know, in this case of sort of having all this money, I think in some ways the communication and the modes of control and authority in the group are the same. I don't think I think humans are humans and so much of gender is just socialized stuff. But when it comes down to when you get to, you know, high stakes like this, people really reveal themselves. And that was sort of fascinating to me. I think, you know, early on, there's a lot more, I guess, the traditional way that women communicate, which is more passive aggressively and furtively, and more through whispers. But as it starts to grow, they're just sort of just as sort of raw and savage as the men in some of those historic movies, and some of them some of them more so. So that was sort of the fun, is to go into the boys space and get to play, which is really always what I'm trying to do.
Okay. I'm glad I wasn't just imagining things because I caught both. They struck me when I saw them. Mel, Miss Hortense is such a strong, dynamic personality. Some readers are likening her to Miss Marple. Can you talk about how you were able to move her through the investigation and still allow for all your other characters to shine?
Yes, of course. So how she moves through the investigation is that my husband described her as water. She gets everywhere, basically. She is, you know, as I've said, fearless. She'll knock down walls to kind of get to the truth. She's very astute. She's been a nurse for 35 years, and so she uses all of those skills of observation and assessment, and she takes her time to kind of come to a conclusion. She uses all of those skills to kind of work through the investigation, but she does have a wound. So as I think I sort of said before, 35 years ago, something traumatic happened to her. And it's, really impacted and affected her. And I think that she has realized that, she has her flaws as a consequence. She's not perfect. And that is why she needs these other characters that you've sort of alluded to. So she needs her loyal but very melodramatic best friend, Blossom, who is always putting her foot in it, but, comes out with some nuggets of information from time to time. She needs Fitz, who is her sort of old love interest, but this man who would do anything to protect her, an ex-boxer, and always there by her side. She needs her nephew, who is Gregory, in his 30s, is a policeman. He wants to, use established forms of justice to get the truth, but realizes sometimes that he needs the help of the partner network too. So I think at the end of the day, it's almost drawing on the theme of the partner that, you need to accumulate. You're better as a collective than you are as an individual.
Thanks. Well, those were my questions. There's a comment and a question in the Q&A if anybody else wants to add any questions in there. For Eli, somebody mentions that even Brett Favre shows up at the beginning of Mississippi Blue 42. And I noted that too, as somebody from Wisconsin who has mixed emotions about Brett. So I did notice Brett.
Yeah. And then I don't think this much. So I grew up as a huge Brett Favre gunslinger fan, and then in these recent years, mixed emotions is a very good way to put it. But yeah, Favre, without much of a spoiler, he's actually the one who gives the title. He actually says Mississippi
Oh,
Blue.
yeah.
He has a line of dialogue, early on in the book. So yeah, that's where.
And then the question for you, also for Eli, is Soho describes and Mississippi Blue 42 as a series debut. Does that mean we'll see more of Ray, maybe others?
Yeah, I'm working right now on Florida Green 17, which is the follow-up,
Oh.
and it does actually takes place in 2023. So right in this wild world of NIL. There you can get a sneak peek at the crime scene, the serial killer wall that is all the ideas with it. Yep, there's another one.
Okay. I'll follow that up, and I'll ask each individually, what's next? Do you have more with these characters, or what are you working on next? I'll start with, how about you, Mel?
Thank you. Yes. So A Murder for Miss Hortense is the first in a new crime series, so there'll definitely be more. I've just submitted my first draft of the second book, which is a relief to have got that out. So yes, there'll definitely be more of Miss Hortense to come.
Lou, I'm guessing no for you. So if yes, I'd love it, but tell me what you're working on next.
No, I'm working. It's completely different. This one, it's set in the early 1930s, and it's about a 12-year-old boy whose mother goes missing, and he has to kind of cross the country trying to find out what happened to her. And she's ended up in some trouble, and he ends up in some trouble. And it's it's a little bit of a thriller, more of a thriller probably, but with some supernatural elements.
And Julia, do you have more with Beatrice?
I do have more planned. The book 2 kind of ends on a little bit of a mini cliffhanger, so there will be more there. But I'm also working on a book that is set in Kentucky. I am a certified bourbon steward, so it's kind of going to be in the world of bourbon, which is a fun thing for me.
Hello, Julia. Nice to meet you. I was just wondering if we should connect over email.
Yes.
And Megan, what do you have next?
Oh, I'm working now on adapting El Dorado Drive for a TV series with A24. So and it would be an ongoing series. So I am figuring out how it will go on from, because for the book, it seems complicated to go on, but it will go on because it's going to be an ongoing series if it goes forward. So it's sort of expanding the world and imagining much more nefarious deeds beyond the scope of the novel.
And I think you could draw out the, sort of the crime and the reveals that come along with it.
Exactly.
And then this was not this occurred to me as I was listening to you all. Everybody's books, and I think yours too, Mel, is pre-pandemic. Was that at all a consideration for you in your writing? I'll start with Mel on that one.
So do you mean that was it written
No,
prior to?
not written, but that the setting for everybody's. I don't think anybody gets to pandemic time, so it's like it doesn't have to be considered at all. Was that a deliberate choice, or is that it just happened that that's how the timing worked out?
For me, it's just how the timing worked out. So my book is set in the 1960s and also in the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Those dates were important for me again because of the Windrush generation coming
Right.
here during that time. And 2000 just felt like a really good period for me to base it. So I hadn't even considered the pandemic in my thinking for this book.
Okay. Yeah, I realized because Eli's is 2014, Megan, yours is 2008 into 2009, I think. Julia, yours is definitely pre-pandemic. And Lou, yours is 2006. Is that where it ends up?
Mine actually, I think, ends up in 2016, right before Trump is elected. This was kind of the idea, but that was kind of generated because there were certain time periods I knew I wanted to write in. I wanted to do the 70s growing up, 80s in LA with the porn world on the periphery, Moscow, Russia in the 90s. So I kind of like based it on eras I wanted to write about.
Thanks. And Megan, there was a question in the Q&A. These characters are still living in my head, and it's from Carol Ann. Cannot imagine what was left on the cutting room floor. Will you be able to incorporate some of that into your series?
I hope so. Then thank you for that. Because they're the sort of three sisters at the center have such a long family history that's alluded to a lot in the book. But I had long flashbacks where we see them in their childhood, and they have a kind of calamitous family. Sort of wealthy degenerate parents who neglect them terribly, which sort of creates their bond. And it was sort of nostalgic for me writing about Detroit in the 70s and 80s. So that all had to go for the rigor of this particular story. But I would love to make use of that because because going back to what Lou says again, quoting about the everything in childhood you can use for the rest of your life, I think is very true. So I would love to do more with that.
Thanks. And I just blanked on a question there. Do you have any questions for each other?
Well, I always like to ask people about their writing practice. I know you get asked it a lot, but I always find it fascinating. Are you a morning writer, all day writer? Do you block if anyone? I'd always love to hear those stories if anyone wants to share. We saw a little bit of Eli's. I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by that whiteboard.
I'll call on somebody. How about Julia? You want to field that?
Well, for me, I try to hit a certain word count a day. I do better if I break things up into small goals. And I'm not a morning person at all. So I'm just like, it's got to happen at some point. We'll see when. The one thing that I really swear by that I always talk about is Aqua Notes. They really should sponsor me. They are waterproof notes you can put in the shower, and I swear it's life-changing because I always get my best ideas when I'm in the shower. And then, as their slogan says, it's down the drain. So no more good ideas down the drain. Aqua Notes.
It's funny, I saw somebody else make mention of writing in the shower, and it might have been song lyrics, but it's so funny. I just recently saw something else that mentioned that, so
I think it's
that
just getting away from the screens and being like, I can't look at my phone, I can't look at my computer. Then the ideas finally come.
okay. How about you, Lou?
Eli and I have talked about this before. I'm a big believer in naps. Like my midday routine is to take a nap because like I really can't function. Like it's like worse than being an alcoholic probably. Like I have to nap or I'm wrecked for the whole day. And I always come out of that with some of my best ideas. And maybe it's the same thing Julia is saying. It's about that sort of unconscious mind given a chance to sort of churn away a little bit.
Lou, you know what I did today at about noon?
Nap?
Good man. Good man.
Hey, if I'm anything, Lou, I'm coachable, man. You know? And what he said to me when I did that interview with him, because I'm a morning person. And so I always, just like what he's saying, you know, like that dream state of like you come out first thing, you get into it. Lou was like, you get to double up on that. You know, like he's like, if you do, you wake up early and work in the morning, and then you double up on that. So yeah, man, I got two kids, so I have to get up really early to work, and you know, and then if they're not here while I'm here at school, then I'll throw that in. But I want Megan, because I also got to talk to this. I used to do a column for Crime Reads called Shop Talk, and Megan had these great figurines. Are there any left from El Dorado Drive? Are there any still around? Are they all? Yeah, tell them about that.
I'm looking at them all. They change all the time, but little statues, little tchotchkes. I have a whole wall of them to sort of distract me. They're sort of whimsical figures, you know, a little tiny rubber wrestler. I have some prayer candles. I have to have something to look at. I also come up with ideas in the shower, so I need aqua notes. And I also am a napper. I took a 15-minute nap before we got on here today, so I will take any ideas. Like I'm non-denominational, and I will take any that come.
Mel, I'd love to hear about your process and how it compared to writing a play, because a play seems such a different proposition to me.
Yeah, of course. Firstly, I'm going to take those aqua notes. So thank you very much, Julia. I've never heard of them before, so brilliant. And I love the idea of a nap. I just need to find the time to actually have the nap in the middle of the day. Firstly, my writing process. So I wrote my book when I was full-time. So I would wake up at 5:30 every morning and make sure that I wrote for a couple of hours before then starting work. It was really good to have that discipline in place, and I sort of committed to do that for myself, and then really would look forward to waking up to write. Actually, it was one of my favorite times of the day. So I completely agree, sort of coming out of that dream state and then, you know, just getting into the writing and kind of, you know, not second guessing yourself. I think that's, for me, is a really good time to write. And the difference between playwriting and novel writing, for me, I really love dialogue, and I know there are a lot of screenwriters actually in the room, but I really love the rhythm of language, and I feel like I've taken that I've used it both in my playwriting space and in my novel writing space. For me, that's kind of key. I often read my work out aloud to myself, because I love to hear the rhythm, and I can sort of sense if the sentence feels right. So that's very similar. Obviously, with a play, you know, it's not as internal as a novel is. So, you know, it's trying to just, I had to get used to that, the ability to do that in the novel writing. And it's funny because I've recently been commissioned to write a play, and I'm actually really struggling with it. I think you do use a different part of your brain when you're doing playwriting and novel writing, and it's been quite difficult for me to kind of step out of one and into the other. Yes, there's a lot of similarities, but I think also a lot of differences as well.
And a number of us have talked about adaptation. So let's say if you had your dream adaptation, who do you want to star in this current work, not one of the others? So I'll go with Eli first for this one. Is it Brett Favre? No.
Yeah, I want Brett Favre to play himself. That's all. That's all. And I really one thing about that whiteboard is I do kind of like, if you look up at the very top, I do kind of try and cast characters like but I don't know. I don't even know all of their names. I think so. No, Brett Favre is Brett Favre. That's all.
How about you, Lou? Anybody you dream of?
No, I don't know. That's a tough one. I really don't like make the connection. Like when I'm writing something, they're real people to me, and so it's hard to make that leap to someone who's actually kind of playing them. I love that. I love when other people do it. I just find it really hard to do myself.
I will say that I really have a hard time visualizing. I can feel characters, I can understand them, I can emotionally connect with them, but they don't, and I can remember books, almost to a page where something is, but visualizing is very difficult for me. So I can imagine as an author that would be a challenge too. How about you, Megan? Well, you are talking about, so who's your casting?
Yeah, I too don't think about it when, I guess I'm superstitious about that. I don't want to fix anyone in my head, but also they're not actors to me. And I feel very connected to them and very protective of them. Like Lou was saying about, whoever the last character he's writing, he loves the most. And to really animate them, you have to kind of love them. And then, so somehow, almost like a dream, I can't picture the features of their face, but I know them intimately. It's almost like I'm inside them somehow, animating them, which is a disturbing image. But yeah, I really don't think about it at all. Though I do think about movies a lot when I write. In general, I think about the visual element, so that's probably where that feels the more natural to me.
Great. Julia, how about you? Any dreams of Bridgerton type adaptation of?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I can really relate to, what everyone has been saying about kind of you're just creating this character. It's hard to always imagine someone, but if I can't get the Muppets, I would say Emma Thompson would be a dream to be anything, anytime. I adore her. I think anyone who's sort of been in Bridgerton or Jane Austen adaptations, I would love to see how they'd interpret it.
And Mel?
I'm going to agree with what everyone else has said. I don't have a fixed cast in my mind. I would be really excited to see actresses and actors take on the role. And I know from my playwriting that they just bring a whole other dimension to the character as well. And suddenly they almost become this other person, which is just wonderful to see. So I would be excited for that. But I don't have any fixed idea of who that would be.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the interplay between when the adaptation does happen and then does that impact, if, it's an ongoing series, what do you do? I mean, look at George R. R. Martin as one of the biggest examples of maybe getting a little stymied by having an actual adaptation out there in the world. It's an interesting proposition, I think, for an author. And we are just about ready to wrap up. If there's no more questions I'm going to check the Q&A. No more questions in the Q&A. I want to thank you all so much. I really did enjoy all of your books. It was a real pleasure for me to be able to read them and then have this conversation with you. Thank you to all of the librarians and library staff who've been joining us today, who joined us today. Next, we'll have our final session of the day, which is the closing keynote with Cory Doctorow. And again, thank you all so much. And we're getting lots of thanks in the chat. Can you all see the chat? You can see the chat. So, best panel of the day. I love to hear that because I agree. And it was a real great pleasure for me. Thank you all.
Thanks so much for having us, Jane, and
Thank you.
all the power to librarians in the world, man. Big props, right?
Yeah. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all so much.